the go ahead, we can start. Yes?
We're going live on Facebook now.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to this webinar entitled The Sumarin Family and Ethnic Cleansing in East Jerusalem. My name is Linda Ramsden and I'm the director of ICAHD UK, which represents the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. ICAHD UK is part of the coalition led by Stop the JNF, which campaigns to remove the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, in the UK. Our coalition is engaged in an international campaign in support of the Palestinian Sumarin family. We have arranged for this evening's public meeting that is appealing to British MPs to do more on this issue. So far, 71 MPs have signed Early Day Motion 529 that requests the government intervene on behalf of the Sumarin family and calls on the Charity Commission to review the charitable status of JNF UK. MP Tommy Shepherd, who tabled the EDM, isn't able to join us this evening, but he sent this message. The continuing persecution of the Sumarin family from East Jerusalem is cruel and unjust, all the more so when the city is in the grip of COVID. The Sumarins have lived in their home for many, many years and should be left in peace. It's time for the JNF to do the right thing and renounce all claims to their home. Doing that would send a signal that they are interested in an outcome that is rooted on justice for everyone. For those of us campaigning, the case of the Sumarin family is yet another example of a key element of Israel's colonial policy in historic Palestine that gets little attention. The policy that Israel itself calls Judaization. Since the beginning of the Zionist enterprise more than a century ago, the aim has been to transform an Arab country into a Jewish one, Palestine into the land of Israel. This Judaization has happened during major military operations like the 1948 to 1967 wars, but also in tens of thousands of small daily events such as Israel's demolition of Palestinian homes and structures vital for living that has led to their displacement, and over time, Judaize the country and displace Palestinians. Using, in this case, the Jewish National Fund, a quasi-governmental corporation with charitable status in the UK, Israel is expending time, resources, and political capital in removing one family, the Sumarins, on doubtful legal, moral grounds. If this is allowed to happen, if the UK government continues to grant JNF charitable status, if the Jewish community and other pro-Israel voices continue to support policies of Judaization and displacement, then they are all complicit. As a result of this meeting, we hope that British government will do more to protect the Sumarin family and revoke the political JNF's charitable status. This meeting is being recorded, and later it will be found on websites of our coalition partners. This meeting is going out live on Facebook and can be shared. During the meeting, the audience will be muted. However, you are invited to submit comments in the chat line, and all questions should go in the special box for Q&A. We aim to conclude this meeting in about an hour. However, we may overrun. But now let us begin. Our first speaker is Amal Sumarin, representing the family central to this campaign that the JNF is attempting to evict from their home. Amal is speaking to us from Silwan in East Jerusalem. And as she tells her family story, her words will be translated. So Amal, Mahaba, Ahlan min fadlik.
أمال بدك تفتح الميكروفون يا أمال، خلي حدا يفتح الميكروفون.
Uri, can you open up Amal's phone?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
هاي فتحنا الميكروفون هينا.
تفضلي.
احكي شيء يعني؟
تفضلي
احكي عن البيت يعني؟
احكي عن خلفية المشكلة اللي بتعانوه، ايش صار معكم يعني من البداية.
احنا هذا البيت يعني بيتنا وبيت جدودنا وبيت يعني من أبا عن جدا، يعني من يوم ما خلقت الدنيا، وهو بيت يعني بيت عمه لجوزي، وعاش فيه يعني من قبل يعني سنين طويلة، من قبل ما أنا أخلق، يعني هو كان عايش في هذا البيت، فتبعي جوزي عنده.
This house is our family house, our fathers, our grandfathers, and we've been here for a long time. And this house is being here even before I was born, and it belongs to the uncle of my husband. تفضلي.
ارتبى جوزي عنده، يعني كان جوزي وحيد لأبوه وكانوا يحبوه الكل، ف اللي هو عمه هذا لجوزي كان مسافرين اولاده في برة البلاد، وجوزي ضل عنده مدلله وربى وجوزه، وانا جيت هون. انا الي يعني حوالي 42 سنة متجوزة، وانا في هذا البيت يعني، وخلفت اولادي.
My husband was the only child, and his uncle's kids went abroad, and he loved my husband a lot, and he brought him up as his son. And we lived in this house. I've been married 42 years, and I've been in this house since then. تفضلي.
خلفت اولادي، ويعني محمود ابني بده يصير عمره 40، طيب بده يطبق ال40، يعني الكبير في اولادي صار عمره 40 سنة. فعندي 7 اولاد وبنت، يعني 5 اولاد وبنتين.
My son Mahmoud is nearly 40 now, and he was born in this house. I have 7 kids, 5 men and 2 women, 5 boys, 2 girls. تفضلي.
وجوزت كل اولادي في هذا البيت، يعني اصغر واحد كمان جوزته، كل عندي 21 حفيد في البيت هذا. فيعني هذا البيت كتير عزيز علي كتير.
All my sons have been married in this house. I have 21 grandchildren, and this house is so dear to my heart. تفضلي.
توفى اللي هو جدي الحاج موسى سمرين، وأنا عايشة عنده كنت، وكتير كان يحبني وعزيز علي، وكان يحب جوزي، وجوزي كان يدير باله عليه. حكى له إنه هذا البيت إلك من بعد ما أنا أموت، مش رح يعني حد ياخده منك، لو إنهم أولادي رجعوا مش رح ياخدوا منك، لأن أنا أعطيتك هذا البيت.
My husband's uncle Musa Sumarin has passed away, but he loved my husband a lot, and he told him that this house belongs to you, and that's what I want to happen. Even if my kids come back, this house is yours. طب تفضلي احكي لنا عن بداية المشاكل يا أخت أمل.
هلا في عندك في ال91 نزلوا علينا الشرطة وقوات خاصة، وحطوا، كانت معانا الأرض اللي هي جنبي هاي اللي مسوينها مدينة داوود، حطوا شيك وحكوا هاي الأرض إلنا. فإحنا يعني عرضنا وصرنا يعني رحنا للمحامي فردمان، يعقوب فردمان، ويعقوب فردمان رفع عليهم قضايا، وهم صاروا إيش بدهم البيت. رفعنا قضية على الأرض، صاروا بدهم البيت.
Yeah, and the trouble started in 1991. Out of nowhere, big number of police forces and special forces stormed the house and the area and put fence around it. And they said, this doesn't belong to you, this belongs to us, and we will take it as part of David's city. And we went to the solicitor, the lawyer, Jacob Friedman, and are trying to get the house back, but they say no, it's not yours. تفضلي.
بعدين لما عرفوا انه احنا رفعنا عليهم قضية على الارض، هم صاروا يرفعوا قضايا على الدار. فنجحت احنا قضية الدار هاي انها ثبتت ملكيتها لمحمد سمرين. هذا بال91 ثبتت
محمد سمرين اللي هو زوجك.
جوزي.
So when they realized that we are taking them to court, they fought back and tried to take the house. We managed at the first instance to win the case, and the court decided that this house belongs to my husband Mohammed Sumarin. تفضلي.
فصاروا ايش هم نجحت بعد ما نجحت قضية البيت، صاروا يستأنفوا كل فترة، يعني يدعوا انه هذا البيت مش لمحمد، انه محمد مزيف وانه مش له هذا البيت. فبين لنا احنا انه مش احنا ما زيفنا ولا هذا الحكي، هذه ارضنا ودارنا من يوم ما خلقت الدنيا. فكيف زيفنا وسوينا؟ ومنين هي الارض مش إلهم؟ من وين إلهم يعني؟
After we won the case, as I said, they kept appealing, appeal after appeal, and they accused my husband Muhammad of falsification of papers, deeds that made the house belonging to him. And how come we falsified? Why would we falsify papers for a house that we lived in and we owned for a long period of time? تفضلي.
وكان جوزي يعني طارد رايح جاي على تل أبيب على يعقوب فردمان. بعدين سلموا القضية لمحمد دحلة. بالآخر تعب يعقوب فردمان من القضايا، وكثير هم بحطوا محاميين، أكثر من 20 محامي، 25 محامي بيكونوا في المحكمة لصالح المستوطنين، وإحنا ببكاش معنا إلا محامي واحد اللي هو محمد دحلة كان معنا. حضرنا جلسة وكان معنا بس هو، وفي معهم 15 واحد.
إمتى كان هذا يا أخت أمل؟ إمتى؟
قبل 8 سنين كان في عندنا محكمة وفي إخلاء، بعثوا لنا ورقة إخلاء للبيت قبل 8 سنين. وقعدنا بالجلسة حوالي 12 ساعة، وكان معنا محمد دحلي، وكان هم معهم حوالي 20 محامي.
My husband kept going to Tel Aviv back and forth to meet the lawyer Friedman, and then the lawyer got fed up with the case and he passed it on to Mohammed Dahla, a Palestinian lawyer. And when we attend court, we have only one lawyer, but the settlers and the government have 25 lawyers. So it's really big presence on their behind. And 8 years ago, they issued a rule of forceful eviction of us from the land. ايش صار بعد ما
بعديها صار تأجيل. محمد دحلة أجل المحكمة، يعني صارت تتأجل. بعدين قبل 2 سنين صارت لنا برضو جلسة. لا بعد ما توفى جوزي حكوا انه خلص يعني محمد سمرين اللي معه الإذن يقعد في البيت لازم يخلي البيت، لازم مات، يعني اللي معه الإذن مات، الحين مرته وأولاده لازم يخلوا البيت.
The lawyer Mohammed Dahla kept appealing, and 2 years ago, and after my husband Mohammed died, they said, since the man who's allowed to be in the house or who claims to have the deeds of the house have passed away, you have no right to stay and you have to evict the house. تفضلي.
بعدين القاضية حكت إنه بدي أشوف مرته وأولاده، يعني محمد سمرين صح مات بس إله مرة وأولاد، يعني لازم أشوفهم. فرحنا حضرنا جلسة قعدنا فيها برضو 12 ساعة بس ما كانت لصالحنا، يعني بس تأجلت وصاروا هم بحطوا كتير. هم
إمتى الجلسة هذه؟ إمتى الجلسة هذه اللي تأجلت؟
قبل 2 سنين صارت لما بعد ما توفى جوزي. عملوا المحكمة هاي فعشان يحكوا إنه محمد سمرين اللي معه الإذن مات، ما في، والحين أولاده ومرته لازم يخلوا. طب ربنا كالها المرة والأولاد يخلوا، وين نروح نقعد بالشارع؟ يعني إحنا
وبرضه القاضية حكمت ضدكم برضه.
حكمت ضدنا.
The judge asked after the death of my husband to see us. She said, I want to see the people who will be staying in the house. And we went to an appearance in court, which was for 12 hours. But sadly, she judged, she ruled against us 2 years ago. طب إيش صار بعدها؟
بعديها تأجلت، صار يأجلها محمد دحلة، وصار محمد دحلة يحكي إنه هدول قويين يعني يمينيين، مش رح أنتوا تقدروا عليهم يعني. المحامي محمد دحلة صار يعني يضعف بالقضية بالآخر، وإحنا يئسنا. فأنا قلت لهم يا جبل ما يهزك ريح، أنا ما بيأس، الدار داري والملك الملك هذا لأهل سلوان، إحنا سلوان ورح يضل إلنا، ومهما يعملوا ومهما يقاوموا مش رح يقدروا ياخذوها إن شاء الله.
The lawyer Dahla kept appealing, but then he told us our opposition is so strong, they are right wing, that's what he said, and they are very powerful within the government, they have connections, and I don't think we will win it. So in a way, I was supposed to lose hope, but I said to myself that I will never ever lose hope, and I'll continue to fight. This is the land, this belongs to the people of Silwan, to us, and I will never ever abandon my right. تفضلي.
وبعدين يعني صارت تتأجل، صارت آخر محكمة عنا في حوالي بشهر 7 كانت عنا محكمة.
7 السنة هذه
ب1/7 صارت عنا محكمة في المحكمة المركزية. فكانوا الحكام يمينيين، وحتى الحاكم اللي حكم على البيت قبل 15 سنة حكم إنه الملكية هاي تثبت لمحمد سمرين، كان في وسط المحكمة وأعطونا ورقة إخلاء ل15/8 لازم نخلي البيت.
Yeah, on the 1st of July this year, after many appeals, we went to the central court, the highest court, and again the lawyers and everybody there was right wing and very connected. And even the judge who gave us the good ruling 15 years ago to stay in the house, he ruled in our favor, that was the one I mentioned earlier, was there, but the ruling sadly was against us, and they gave us a notice to leave, to be evicted from the property on the 15th of August this year. ليش صار بعدها؟ تفضلي.
احنا حطينا كمان محامي اللي هو اسمه وسيم دكوار، فساعد محمد دحلة في تأجيل المحكمة، يعني كمان مرة انه يتأجل القضاء للعليا، يعني يرتفع للمحكمة العليا. طلبنا ان نرفع يعني اجلوها، اعطونا انه راح يأجلوها لشهر 4 معانا لشهر 4
السنة الجاية.
شهر 4 السنة الجاية. اعطونا.
بهذا الوقت انتم ما زلتوا بالبيت؟
لا بالبيت ان شاء الله، بنضل في البيت باذن الله.
Yeah.
انا عندي امل ان نضل في البيت ان شاء الله.
We asked another lawyer to represent us, Wasim Dubois, and he appealed, and we are taking it to the High Court, and he told us that it will be postponed to April 2021 next year, and we will never leave the house. I will stay in the house no matter what. طيب يا أخت أمال، إيش بتحبي تحكي كمان؟
انت بتعرف انه كل محكمة احنا يعني بنحضرها وبنأجلها وبستأنفوا فيها، بندفع مبالغ كثير مصاري، يعني كثير مبالغ مصاري بطلب المحكمة لتأجيل المحاكم. المحامين بدهم كمان يعني فلوس كثير، واحنا يعني وضعنا سيء، مش هذاك الوضع يعني، حتى البيت نفسه يعني وضعه سيء، يعني مش هذيك الفيلا ولا القصر، يعني بيت عادي، مش عارف شو اللي يعني حاببهم فيه، بدهم ياخذوا، هم حابينه عشان قريب على الكوتل وعلى الأقصى.
I must say that on top of the suffering that we are going through, there is the financial side. We're not a rich family, and these appeals and lawyer costs is costing us a lot of money, and I just don't understand how and why they want this house. It's a small house. It's not a mansion or a villa, but I understand that they want it because it's close to Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Haram. So that's why they're after it. تفضلي.
بس بحب أقول يعني إنه يعني الإشي ما يضلش يعني يميني، يعني إنه ضدنا إحنا، يعني دايما إيدهم مع بعض، إنه المستوطنين أبدأ من صاحب الملك من الأساس، يعني إحنا أساس الدنيا هاي أرضنا ودارنا، وهم من بدهم يتعدوا علينا، ينزعوا الملك منا، ياخذوا أملاكنا ودورنا. وين ننزل بالشوارع إحنا أنا وعيالي؟ هان في عندي 4 عيال ساكنين، كل واحد ساكن في دار، وعندهم أطفال وعندهم عائلات، وين بدهم يروحوا؟ هذا اللي بقوله أنا، إشي متعبني كثير هذا الإشي.
I'm so burdened by the injustice, by how on earth do these people think that it's their right, those settlers, those occupying settlers, they think that it's their right to come and take us from our land and just kick me out of my house, me and my 4 kids and their families. Where are we going to go? Are we going to go in the streets? We have nowhere else to go. You know, I am so tired and so upset and so emotionally drained by this injustice. تفضلي.
بعدين بوضع الكورونا انت شايف كيف الاوضاع، يعني لا بيشتغلوا ولا بيعتملوا، والله العظيم ما بيشتغلوا، اولادي قاعدين في البيوت وحياة الله وين بدهم يروحوا؟ وين بدهم يعيشوا؟ لا معنا مصاري ندفع لمحاكم ولا معنا ناكل، يا دوب الواحد يقدر ياكل هالايام. يعني برضه الواحد لازم يشوف وين حقوق الانسان، وين المؤسسات، وين العالم. اخرى البيت اللي حاويني وساترني انا واولادي بدهم يطلعوني منه، وين بدي اروح؟ الله اكبر عليهم.
Yeah. Corona added to the trouble because there is no work now. My kids are not working, and we're in real hardship. And it's really unbelievable what they're going to do, what we're going to do with this pressure, continuous pressure to evict us from our house. This is not fair. And now, where are the human rights organizations? Where are people who claim that they protect democracy and human rights for people? It's really, really bad and really, really unjust.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you,
Now,
Shukran.
Linda, now the
Shukran.
translation back, we couldn't manage the WhatsApp. So I don't know what will happen. I have to translate to her.
Okay, so we have
what do you want me to do?
we have a technical problem. I'll have to get advice from one of our other technical advisors here for translation, ongoing translation for Amal, so that
Shall I suggest something? If I summarize everything, and then at the end, I believe she's coming back. If I summarize it and ask her permission first, maybe she doesn't want to listen to the nitty-gritty. Just summarize the gist of what everybody said, and then give her a good paragraph, good 3, 4, 5 minutes of what was everybody saying. And if she's happy with this, shall I ask her that?
Okay, just if she'll hear the other speakers, you'll take some notes and quickly.
And at the very end, I just summarize it, and I think she'll be happy. أخت أمال من فضلك، عندك مانع إن أنا لأنه في كتير ناس هتحكي، لو بدي أترجم سطر يعني كل كلمة حيطول البرنامج كتير، عندك مانع إني ألخصهم وبالآخر أحكي لك بالضبط إيش انحكى؟
مش مشكلة، عادي.
يعني عادي، يعني حيكون في فترة حاليا هم بيحكوا بالإنجليزي، أنا راح ألخصها وبعدين أحكي لك كل شيء، يعني أي شيء مهم اللي انحكى أحكيه لك، لأنه عندنا مشكلة مش عارفين نفتح خط معاكي على التليفون.
طيب تمام.
Okay. I hope that's sorted now. Thank you. Shukran. Shukran, Amal. Shukran.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're now going to turn to Rabbi Eric Asherman. Rabbi Eric is an Israeli Reform rabbi and the executive director of the Israeli human rights organization Torah of Justice. Rabbi Eric is a key coordinator of the international campaign, JNF, Do Not Evict the Sumarin family. And he is mobilized within Jewish communities to oppose this eviction. Rabbi Eric has much experience on the ground in providing protective presence for Palestinians when faced with settler violence and in standing up to Israeli authorities engaged in violations of international human rights law, such as the demolition of Palestinian homes. Rabbi Eric is also joining us from Jerusalem. Over to you, Rabbi Eric.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, although I'm a bit embarrassed to be here. I am a rabbi. I am an Israeli. I'm part of the Reform movement. I'm a Zionist, which may surprise or even upset some of you, in the sense that I believe that we Jews have an equal, although not greater, right to live in what is also our homeland. So I am so embarrassed that my people, my country, and even my movement within Judaism, the Reform movement, have all been complicit in ganging up on harnessing the power of the state of to evict the Sumarin family, and as was mentioned in the chats, and other families as well. But for our purposes tonight, we're talking about the Sumarin family. I want to start with a few definitions. Member of Knesset Jabarin will be talking more about the Karen Kayemet JNF after me, but I just want to say that this is a body which was created in the beginning of the 20th century for a purpose which I find acceptable, to buy land for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. It is known for some admirable environmental work, but it has always had a dark side. And again, member of Knesset Jabarin will talk much more about that dark side. But the other piece of it has always been land control at the expense of non-Jews. That has always been a part, sometimes more obvious, sometimes behind the scenes, a part of their work, and that's important to understand. Even many of the people that donate to the Karen Kayemet or JNF, and it's been mentioned, the Stop the JNF campaign, don't fully realize this. The generations of Jews who have given and put in these pushkas, these little boxes in their kitchens, coins, to many of them had no idea that that was also going to dispossess Palestinians. And in fact, as I'll talk about in a second, in terms of the context of our campaigns, some of the most powerful statements came from people who said, we've been supporting for 3 generations in our family the Karen Kayemet JNF, but not to evict families from their homes or to forest over Israeli-Palestinian villages such as El Rakib, for example. The second organization that you need to know about is ICAHD. This is a settler organization which, under the guise of archaeology, they present themselves as doing archaeology. The very seductive idea that Silwan, this East Jerusalem neighborhood, was once the place where King David lived, and it may have been. It's absolutely possible, though not proved, that it may have been. But using that seductive premise, they pursue their real agenda, which they've sometimes admitted, which is to Judaize East Jerusalem, and particularly Silwan. The third definition is the absentee property law. The absentee property law was a law first created in the 1950s, and it was used any land which had been quote unquote abandoned by Palestinians. It was never used against Jews, and left their homes in the 48 war. Their lands were transferred to a custodian. Now, one might think that that custodian would then transfer that land to remaining family members, to other Israeli Palestinians, but it always was a mechanism for taking that land and transferring it to Jews. That law was again applied after 1967 in East Jerusalem. Also important to remember, because if there will be another annexation in the rest of the occupied territories, we could see this law being applied again. And originally, it was used relatively innocuously. In other words, the rules promulgated by the Israeli government in 1968 said that this was only to be used if a family was totally gone. And even then, as I just said, why would that land then not be, or those properties not be given to family members or other Palestinians? But of course, even the innocuous use of this law was was to transfer land to Jews. But in the 1980s, it was used and taken, the custodian's office was taken over by people that were much more radical. And so, for example, precisely what happened to the Sumarin family was, yes, as Amal said, the three sons who were the legal heirs of this home were out of the country, but her family, or the family she married into, was living in the home. It was never abandoned. And under those 68 rules, it never should have been taken. But ICAHD contacted the Karen Kayemet JNF, and they conspired to take over a list of some 15 homes in Silwan. And they got the custodian to do so. And that was the beginning of what has been this 30-year nightmare for the Sumarin family. And even when it was mentioned before, the questions about whether some of the documents that the Sumarin family later used in their defense were forged or not, it would have been irrelevant, because the original sin, to use a good Jewish term, was that the home was taken to begin with through a use of the absentee property law, which later an Israeli government commission, the Klugman Commission, showed was unacceptable. And the Rabin government was in the process of starting to try to reverse some of that when he was assassinated. So that the real story starts with the fact that, I say 3 of the 10 commandments. Because ICAHD and JNF coveted this land, they bore false witness to steal the property. That's the bottom line. So in 2011, the family was about to lose the home. They already, as Amal mentioned, had lost half the yard, but they were about to lose the home itself. And not only that, but to pay millions of shekels in quote unquote back rent. And we put together a coalition at that point, which mobilized thousands of people around the world, mostly Jews, many of whom have been contributors to the JNF, to say, not in our name. And that posed such a threat to the Karen Kayemet JNF that also working with connections, my movement, the reform movement within Judaism, actually has been part of the governing coalition for many, many years of the Karen Kayemet. It's kind of a worldwide consensus wall-to-wall coalition, but the reform movement had an incredible amount of power and actually had the number 2 person at the time, and it was brokered to freeze that imminent eviction in November of 2011. That, through all kinds of reasons, which I don't have time to get into, was unfrozen. I've been speaking with my movement since 2017, as the legal noose was closing in around the family, to ask that, again, we stop this. And in recent months, the reform movement's been working very hard, but it was too little too late. If they had done back in 2017, 2018, what they've done in the last few months, they might have actually within the JNF stopped this. We also had a huge, recently, some 10,000 people who wrote to the JNF. But it's much more difficult now. As a result of our success in 2011, many of the JNF affiliates around the world, in the United States, I believe in Great Britain as well, have separated themselves. Their mantra is, we're not the Karen Kayemet, we're not the JNF in Israel. We don't do the things that you're opposed to. That's made the whole process much more difficult. But beyond that, there were just elections this year. Every 5 years, there are elections with the World Zionist Congress. And they're the people that appoint the board of the Karen Kayemet JNF, and who then appoint the board of their subsidiary, Hemanuta, which actually has been waging this war. And it kind of made me funny to think that the outgoing board was kind of center left, and the new board is going to be much more to the right. They weren't very left, certainly, but in fact, it's going to be much more worse. And this is where I get to what's my last 2 minutes here. What's critical for those of you in Parliament. There's some debate about this, and I've been talking to you and consulting with people today. But as to the best of our knowledge, with the new board that has just coming in this month, the possibilities which potentially existed until now to refreeze or even come up with a more permanent solution that would return the home to the family from within the Karen Kayemet JNF are gone. Some people disagree. Some people say it could still happen. I think it's very unlikely. And that means we have two possibilities left. We do have the Supreme Court appeal coming up in April, but even if we win that, the lawyers say at best that wins 2 or 3 years. It's not going to solve the problem. We have another legal idea that could bring about a more permanent solution. But counting on the Israeli courts to solve this, as hopeful as I am, can't be counted on. And that means that if we do not succeed in court, the only possibility that will be left to prevent this family from being evicted will be you, the international community, and particularly governments. It is actually not ICAHD and JNF that started this, although they're certainly very complicit. It was the Israeli government. And furthermore, no act as sensitive as evicting a high-profile family as this can happen in East Jerusalem without approval from the highest levels of the Israeli government, the prime minister or somebody close to him, or maybe her sometime, but right now him. And that means it'll be your role to do everything possible to say to the Israeli government, do not allow this to happen. They will tell you, but it's a civil case. It's a court case. It's not our job, but it is actually the norm that nothing like this ever happens in East Jerusalem without Israeli government approval. It is absolutely, traditionally, something that is always dealt with by the Israeli government. You must not allow the Israeli government to say it was decided by a court and we're not responsible. They started it, they are responsible, and things like this can only happen with Israeli government sign off, and that's where you are crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Eric Asherman, for those words. Now, our MP, Richard Bergen, has to leave us shortly. So I'm swapping the order of our speakers. So before we hear from Dr. Youssef Jabarin, the MK, we are going to speak or to hear from now Richard, an MP who represents the Labour Party for Leeds East. And he will explain why he signed early day motion 529. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I very much valued the opportunity to hear from Amal and to hear from Rabbi Arik as well. And I think this meeting tonight opened with a testimony from Amal that everyone should listen to, because that's the human cost of the human rights abuses being carried out by the government of Israel. And I know that the campaign in support of the Sumarin family gives us all hope, gives us hope of people working together, gives us hope of a better future. And I thought it was very inspiring to hear from Rabbi Arik about the work that's being done. So you've got the Israeli community and the Palestinian community working together to try and end the human rights abuses, the evictions, and the treating of Palestinians as second-class citizens. So I think that can inspire us all. In relation to the early day motion, this was an early day motion in support of the Sumarin family, and it talks about the fact that the families we've heard have lived at their property with deeds of ownership for over 50 years. It reiterates that ethnic cleansing is one of the most serious crimes, and it calls on the UK government to put its commitment to upholding international law into practice, requests that the government of our country intervenes on behalf of the Sumarin family, and calls on the Charity Commission to review the charitable status of JNF UK. And this was an early day motion signed by 71 members of Parliament. It was a cross-party motion. So, as we've heard at the beginning, the Scottish National Party Member of Parliament, Tommy Shepherd, put the motion down, and it's been signed by MPs from a number of parties. For example, Scottish National Party, as I've mentioned, the Labour Party, one of the sponsors of this early day motion. In other words, one of the first signatories was the Labour MP Andy Slaughter. There's a signature from Caroline Lucas, the Green Party Member of Parliament. A Conservative Member of Parliament has signed it. Plenty of my Labour colleagues have signed it. The Social Democratic and Labour Party from Northern Ireland, one of their MPs, has signed it, for example. And so this is an early day motion supported by 71 members of Parliament from a number of different political parties, the Liberal Democrats as well. And what that goes to show is that people can work together across different political parties against the kind of injustice that we've seen today. And I've seen this injustice with my own eyes as well. It was in February 2016 that, as a Member of Parliament, I went to Israel and to Palestine with Kabu and met members of the Knesset, met groups such as Breaking the Silence, an Israeli human rights organization. I also met a family and visited their home in the old city of Jerusalem, who, despite being in that house for 60 years, were really being pressured to be pushed out of their home by settlers. And it seemed that, far from protecting them, the government was at the very least allowing this to go ahead, or indeed encouraging this process, as we've heard today. One of the other things I saw when I went there was the St. John's Eye Hospital in East Jerusalem, where so much work, good work goes ahead. We also visited a Bedouin community. But one of the things that registered most with me was when we visited a military court for children in the occupied territories in the West Bank, and we saw a number of trials which, having observed them, these trials of young people, children, would give anybody who believes in justice and a fair trial, it would give anybody cause for concern. I think that when it comes to campaigning for justice for the Palestinian people, that the stories of Palestinians must be heard. And that's why it was so important to hear from Amal tonight, because we often talk about the big political concepts as politicians. But what I think will gain even more support for this very just cause of human rights and justice for the Palestinian people and equality is for people to hear the human stories, hear the case studies, hear the stories of the demolished homes, hear the stories of children arrested and put on trial and not treated fairly and put in prison. But to hear also of the growing campaign amongst Israelis for a better future and for an end to the injustices and human rights abuses faced by the Palestinian people. I think that more and more people waking up when it comes to the situation in the occupied territories, in the way that the Palestinian people are treated. Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century, of course, makes things far worse, but we can't allow the plight of the Palestinian people to be swept under the carpet. Those of us who are in positions to speak up must speak up. Those of us who are in a position to do so must use our position in the UK Parliament or in the Knesset to speak up and speak out against these injustices. I know that the Palestine Solidarity Campaign plays a very important role indeed in raising awareness of the situation amongst trade unionists in the United Kingdom, for example, and amongst the wider public. Coming up in November is the United Nations International Day for Palestine, and I and other members of Parliament will be marking that day. I'm also very mindful of the fact that it was in 2014, before I was a member of Parliament, that the Parliament in our country voted to recognise the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, but our government has not enacted that yet. That is long, long overdue, and we need to join the rest of the international community in recognising the state of Palestine. And so I'm pleased to be with you tonight. I'm sorry that I have to leave now because of some urgent constituency matters. I'm sorry that I can't hear the speech from Youssef from the Knesset, but I think this has been a fantastic gathering of people all committed to working together, not only in support of the Sumarin family, but in support of a just and equitable outcome for the Palestinians, in support of a better future, in support to the end of the human rights abuses and legal occupation carried out by the government of Israel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us. We're so sorry you have to leave now. And our timing has overrun a little bit. We will get back in touch with you again about pushing through, getting more MPs to sign this early day motion. And if you will also be taking what Rabbi Asherman said to you when you talk to other MPs about how we have to really hold the Israeli government to account, despite what is saying about it doesn't want to be involved in this case. And remembering the absentee property law and all that. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you. Well, now we are going to turn our attention to our final speaker. We are absolutely thrilled that we are joined now by Dr. Youssef Jabarin, MK, which means he's a member of the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament, where he represents the joint list. Dr. Jabarin is an attorney, academic, and founding director general of the Arab Center for Law and Policy General. Dr. Jabarin will provide an overview of the JNF's work of displacement throughout all of historic Palestine, and he's speaking to us from Al-Fahim in the state of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for moderating this, and thank you for having me on this distinguished panel and on this important issue, because I think that the Sumarin family case represent the overall injustices inflicted on Palestinians, especially the Palestinian community in East Jerusalem. The Sumarin family is definitely a victim of the brutality of Zionist colonialism in East Jerusalem. And it's a case where we see this cooperation between the Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, the Jewish National Fund, with the extremist settlers organization like ICAHD that was mentioned before in this discussion, And the JNF has a long history of Palestinian land exploration all over the state of Israel in 1948 borders, and definitely in East Jerusalem. I mean, it's important to notice here that we speak about the area of East Jerusalem that was occupied back in 1967 and was definitely illegally by international law standards annexed to Israel. And the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem were granted not Israeli citizenship, but Israeli residency, which is kind of like a shaky status that also enable the Israeli authority to strip Palestinians from their right to continue to live in their homes and in their homeland. Today, we are speaking of about over 300,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem under a continued threat of being evacuated, of eviction, whether from their homes or stripped from their status as residents in Israel. So the ethnic cleansing the Israeli ethnic cleansing policies are working on both areas, whether stripping Palestinians in East Jerusalem from their status or evacuating them from their homes. It's important, I think, here to understand I would say the clear racist policies of the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund owns today about 13% of the lands in Israel. Most of it was transferred to it from the custodian of absentee properties. So basically, most of this land was owned originally by the indigenous Palestinian people who became refugees. And the Jewish National Fund clearly says that it works to benefit only the Jewish people, which means that it clearly and openly and expressly exclude and discriminate against Palestinians, whether Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem or Arab Palestinian citizens like me within Israel. So, and I found it's interesting maybe to share with you the file that was basically filed by JNF to the Israeli Supreme Court in one of the litigations about the nature of the JNF in Israel. The JNF says in this document, and I quote here, and it's important for me to see their stance about their policies. It says that the JNF is not the trustee of the general public in Israel. Its loyalty is given to the Jewish people in the diaspora and in the state of Israel. The JNF, in relation to being an owner of land, is not a public body that works for the benefit of all citizens of the state. The loyalty of the JNF is given to the Jewish people, and only to them is the JNF obligated. The JNF, as the owner of the JNF land, does not have a duty to practice equality toward all citizens of the state. So this is a clear statement by the JNF about its policies within Israel. So on one hand, it's a national body that was giving public authorities to run a major land in Israel. But on the other hand, it declares that it serves only the Jewish community, whether Jewish in Israel or outside Israel. And basically the GNF has played basically a dominant role in the Judaization of the land, and definitely of East Jerusalem. So when I bear in mind that the GNF is considered a charity organization in the UK, I have to say that this is incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible to accept the fact that such a body is openly declaring that it's racist, it excludes Palestinians and Arab citizens, and it basically openly discriminates against them. All of these practices and all of this set of rules in the JNF will be considered illegal according not just to international law, but definitely also according to any of of the European country laws, because this is a clear violation of fundamental rights of equality and of equal citizenship. So the JNF is part of this mechanism, of this institutional mechanism that preserves the Jewish supremacy within Israel, but also within the Palestinian occupied territories. And unfortunately, the Israeli Supreme Court has never really interfered and they question this fundamental issue, and basically the Supreme Court in Israel has been part of the problem here. In the specific case of the Sumarin, it's important to see that another racist law was used here, which is the absentees property law. The absentees property, the property of the Palestinian refugees, whether they are outside the borders of Israel or they are internal refugees. So Palestinians who had to leave their property, or they were evacuated, or they were forced to leave, or they happened to be outside the area where Israel was established, were looked at as absentee. And the rights of ownership of the absentees was basically transferred to the state of Israel and its institution, including the GNF. And in the specific case of the house of the Sumarin, the house was registered as an absentee property without even the family members knowing about it. Why? Because it happens that one member of the family was considered by the Israeli law as an absentee, and that was enough. And interestingly, what happened here, that an affidavit provided by the lawyers of ICAHD and the GNF to the basically the Israeli institutions led to this kind of registration. And again, this is a clear tool of ethnic cleansing. It's basically looking at Palestinians as absentees and then transferring the ownership of their properties to the basically Israeli hands, to the GNF and to the extreme settlers or organizations, and that happens also even for families who are internally displaced within Israel, like refugees within Israel. Many of them, hundreds of thousands of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, are looked at as absentees, although they live close by their original communities and their original homes that was destroyed back in 1948. And the JNF has played this role basically of Judaization, of transferring ownership from Palestinians to Jewish hands, while continuing to do that now more than 70 years after the establishment of the state of Israel. In the end, I would say that international pressure is definitely important here, and it could really affect a change. In the last few weeks, following public and international pressure, the JNF has announced that it's still considering its steps vis-a-vis the Sumarin family. And I believe that if more pressure is exercised by the international community, this could really save the family and save other Palestinian properties. I must say that that this case is an implementation, clear implementation on the ground of the deal of the century of the Trump administration and the President Trump, that denies Palestinians any right in Jerusalem, including in East Jerusalem. But it's also a clear implementation of the nation state law that was adopted by the current government back in 2018. And Section 4 of that law speaks of Jerusalem complete and united is the capital of the state of Israel, which means that Palestinians have no rights in Jerusalem according to this basic and constitutional law. And the ramification of that is basically this continued attack on the Palestinian rights and the continuing process of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. I believe that the UK has a role to play here, especially that the JNF is registered in the UK, and I believe that international pressure is key here in order to protect the rights, whether specifically of the Sumarin family or of Palestinians in East Jerusalem in general. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jabarin. Now, we've overrun massively in terms of time, but this has been a very unique opportunity, you see, for us to hear from people directly on the ground, and it is a huge subject. I am going to ask just a couple of questions, and then I'm going to call on Amal to say a few words as well before she leaves us. A question is probably directed more for Rabbi Eric Asherman. Do you believe that the JNF can ever really be reformed? I remember there was an article just a few days ago in Jewish Currents. Can the reform movement stand up to the settler right? Rabbi Alyssa Wise of Jewish Voice for Peace said that the JNF is not reformable. What is your opinion of that, Eric? Are you able to comment?
Sure, and that's already been discussed a bit here on the chat. It depends what you mean by reform. Would the JNF ever entirely change its DNA to stick to environmental work or even managing properties for the Jewish people without the dark side, without the additional agenda of trying to displace Palestinians and take over Palestinian land? Again, up until this last week, there was somewhat of an internal struggle. The reform movement, when it found out that properties were being acquired across the 67 border behind their back, put up a huge fight. I don't think anything can happen in the next 5 years. Theoretically, if there would be an awakening of the Jewish community worldwide before the next election, which would in 5 years set up the next board, and to the extent of saying, not in our name, throw these people out, do things that are decent. Even in the same way that JNF USA, for example, separated itself from the JNF in Israel because they said, we don't want to be associated with many of these things. Maybe it could happen. It would be a very, very difficult process to really, truly, and entirely reform the JNF Karen Kemet, but I'm the eternal optimist. So, you know.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I must say it's been quite overwhelming to have so much in the chat line, so much discussion, hard to keep up with that, and then with questions as well. I would like to call upon Amal Sumarin, please.
I'll start
little
by
bit.
translating quickly.
Yes, if you will translate, please.
مرحبا أمال. سمعاني؟ أخت أمال مرحبا سمعاني؟
Mute.
Okay.
She has to go off mute. Right.
I would like to hear some of her final comments. You know, we believe if she is evicted from her home, that could open the door for many other Palestinians as well to also be evicted. And so this case really is key. We want to win this case because it could be, you know, provide protection for others. So what are Amal's final words to us on the
I'll
importance
just spend 2 minutes translating to her what has
other
been said.
Palestinians?
مرحبا أخت أمال سمعاني؟
أهلين مرحب سمعتك.
بس بدي ألخص لك باختصار. الراباي حكى تكلم عن صندوق النقد، الكيرن كيامت تكلم عن خططهم، تكلم انه في جمعيه اسمها العاد بتحاول تاخذها، لانه بيعتقدوا زي ما انت حكيت انه الملك داوود عاش في هذيك المنطقه وبيستغلوا قانون الغائبين. يعني تكلم بصفه عامه عن محاولاتهم لطرد الفلسطينيين اللي تركوا اراضيهم عام 48، واستغلوا انه الورثه لبيتكم خارج البلاد، فاستغلوا قانون الغائبين عشان يعملوا هيك. يعني هذا هو اللي حكاه. وكمان بيحاولوا على 15 منزل في منطقة سلوان. هو بيحكي انه المحكمة في شهر 4 لو حكمت، يعني هو متوقع لسه في فترة طويلة راح تكون بعد شهر 4، والمحاكم الإسرائيلية زي ما هو حكى لا يمكن الاعتماد عليها لأنه الحكومة هي الأساس، ولو أن الحكومة بتنكر انه هي مسؤوليتها، بتقول انها قضيه مدنيه. هذا اللي حكى الراباي. العضو البرلمان البريطاني ريتشارد بيرغون بس حكى شغله يعني مشجعه لكم، انه في 71 عضو برلمان بريطاني وقعوا مقترح للحكومه، ناقشوه في البرلمان. هذول ال 71 يعني بدينوا في محاولات اسرائيل لاخلاءكم من بيتكو. هذا المقترح رقمه 529 بديروا التطهير العرقي، بديروا طرد الأسرة اللي قعدت 50 عام بالبيت. 71 عضو من مختلف الأحزاب، الحزب القومي الاسكتلندي، حزب العمال، حزب الخضر، عضو واحد من حزب المحافظين اليميني، وكمان السوشيال ديمقراطس الديمقراطيين الاشتراكيين في منطقة شمال إيرلندا. فهو بيحكي يعني انه مش هو وهدول وبعض اعضاء البرلمان مش راح يتوقفوا عن الكلام في اتجاه حقوقكم، تجاه انكم تضلكم ببيتكم. الدكتور جبارين مشكورا تكلم عن خطط إسرائيل للتطهير العرقي، خططهم كيف إنه ينزعوا منكم كأهل القدس الشرقية. أول إشي قيمتكم القانونية، وإنه يعطيكم هويات يعني لا تعني جنسية ولا تعني إلا شيء إلا يعني حق للإقامة، وكمان يطلعوكم من بيوتكم. وهو بيقول إنه قضيتكم جزء من التطهير العرقي اللي كان بيتم للفلسطيني وما زال مستمر. فهذه نقطة كثير مهمة. وتكلم أيضا عن كيرن كيامت وعن صندوق النقد اليهودي، إنه ولائهم الأول والأخير هو لليهود خارج وداخل إسرائيل. وهذا تكلم أيضا المستمعين وكلام كثير مهم، إنه القوانين الدولية كلها ضد ما تفعله إسرائيل، لكن للأسف طبعا صندوق النقد القومي مستمر في محاولة ترسيخ ما سماه دكتور جبرين التفوق اليهودي على الشعب الفلسطيني. والمحكمة العليا هو بيعتقد أنها لا تقدم حلول، بل هي قد تكون متورطة. وهذه القوانين، قانون الغائبين وكل القوانين اللي إسرائيل قوانين عنصرية. ودعا الشعب ودعا المستمعين أنه الحل الوحيد هو ضغط دولي على إسرائيل لإيقاف السياسات الغير يعني عادلة، بل يعني ربما تكون الإجرامية يعني. يعني هذا هو اللي انحكى. لقيت في سؤال لك يا أخت أمال من ليندا، بيحكي لك إنه هل تعتقدي إنه لو نجحوا في إخلاءكم بالقوة سيفتح هذا المجال لإخلاء باقي أسر أخرى وفلسطين آخرين من أراضيهم؟
طبعا طبعا، لانه هم عمالهم بيعملوا سلسله طويله لسلوان، بدهم ياخذوا كل سلوان. احنا دارنا يعني زي ما تقول اول منطقه رح ياخذوها وسلسله رح تمد لك قدام لكثير بيوت، لانه كثير اخذوا اللي جنبي، اخذوا اللي جنبي واخذوا اللي تحتي، ولسه رح ياخذوا، بدهم ياخذوا البستان وبدهم ياخذوا كثير عمالهم بشو اسمه، بدهم ياخذوا المنطقة.
Yeah, sure, no doubt that if they manage to evict us, it's a plan not only for us, but it's for Silwan area in general. They are, their plan is to take the whole of Silwan. They've already taken areas next to me and areas further down, and they took some orchard in the area. And no doubt it's a plan. We are not the only one targeted. أخت أمل، بتحبي يعني تحكي للمستمعين كلام أنت حابة تحكيه، كلام تاني، أي شيء في بالك تحكيه؟ بالمناسبة أنتوا أصلا من القدس ولا هجرتوا من 48؟
أنا بطلب إنه يكون في ضغط من المنظمات هاي اللي بتساعد الحقوق الإنسان والحقوقية من جميع الدول، إنها تساعدنا وتوقف معنا، وتوقف كمان لكل البيوت اللي مضغوطة زينا. يعني مش إحنا بس لحالنا، في كثير في سلوان بيوت مضغوطة وعائلات كثيرة بدها تخلي وبعتوا لهم إخلاء. فإن شاء الله ما بنخلي وبنضل في بيوتنا، وبطلب المساعدة أنا إن شاء الله.
I would like to appeal to all people who are interested in human rights and freedom of people to exert pressure wherever they are on organizations, human rights organizations, to work not only for us, but for all the families that are threatened in Silwan. And this appeal, I hope it reaches people and that they will act upon it so that people are not evicted. We are not evicted and other people are not evicted of their own right to their houses. ايش تحبي تحكي كمان اختي امل؟ انتوا بالمناسبه اصلا من القدس ولا هجرتوا؟
لا احنا من القدس ابا عن جدا، موجودين في القدس، احنا سلاون الاصل.
Just a point to clarify, the Sumarin family is from Jerusalem and they lived in Jerusalem all the time. They were not moved to Jerusalem, so they are indigenous people of Jerusalem. Carry on.
Excellent. Okay, Mumtaz, excellent. Shukran, Amal, shukran. And we will be telling your stories. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we will continue in the struggle for you. Inshallah, you will not have to leave your home, but we have quite a struggle, inshallah.
ليندا بتقول لك ليندا انه شكرا لك كثير، وبوعدك انه احنا هنستمر في العمل لاجل الا تخلوا والا يطردوكم من بيتكم. وهذا وعد احنا كلنا ملتزمين.
يا رب. وأنا بتشكركم كتير على مجهودكم معنا وعلى وقفتكم معنا، وإن شاء الله بنضل كلنا يدية واحدة، والله ينصرنا على الظلم اللي إحنا مظلومينه يا رب.
I would like to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for your stance, and I hope that one day both of us, all of us, will be victorious against the injustice that is being inflicted on us.
Excellent. Thank you. Shukran. Shukran. As I've said, we've gone massively over time, so we're going to have to be quick with just final comments. Dr. Jabarine, I need to come back to you if you have thought of anything else you would like to say quickly. We know that the JNF, you know, we've mentioned how it puts across the fact that it's good, it focuses on the environment and planting trees and things, but the exact opposite is happening in terms of things that are happening in the Negev with the Bedouin villages that are being, you know, destroyed. Do you want to have a final comment on that? It's been something that's been raised, just a little bit of that, and then to Eric.
Yeah, just a quick, I don't think that this is really a legal issue, because the law itself here is discriminatory law. It's a racist law, and the Israeli Supreme Court, I think, is basically just covering, you know, and implementing this law. So it's that's why I believe that the international pressure here would be important, especially, as I said, speaking now, you know, that we're in the UK, that the GNF is registered in the UK as a charity. I don't see how a charity could be that racist and be part of ongoing, basically, ethnic cleansing against Palestinians, and playing a dominant role in evicting them from their homes and evicting them from their lands, whether it's in East Jerusalem or mainly in the Arab areas in the south of Israel, in the Nakab. So I think that Lily, your public and international pressure would be here important to effect a change and to protect the rights of Palestinians.
Excellent, thank you. And certainly that is a point that we have learned with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and Rabbi Eric Asherman's been with us on this. But we have found that the Israeli Supreme Court deems itself above international law. So we have to keep speaking on that. And certainly for people here in the UK, get right behind the Stop the JNF campaign, which is working to hold the Charity Commission to account in terms of what is happening with that charitable status here. Eric, quick comment from you, and then I'll be having my closing comments.
So in the Jewish tradition, last week we started reading the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible from the beginning. In the very first chapter, we're told that human beings are created in God's image. It doesn't say that just the Jews are created in God's image. It doesn't say that just the wealthy are created in God's image. It makes a point of saying that both men and women are created in God's image. And at the end of the day, with all our different ideologies, any ideology, any belief, and we've seen this so many times in human history, becomes a nightmare if you forget the importance of human beings. And after all of this, we're talking about a family. 19 family members who are living in fear for 30 years, not knowing if tomorrow they're going to be thrown out of their home. That is the bottom line. I have to give credit to the UK. The UK government has done more than almost any other government for the Palestinians of Susia, for Khan al-Ahmar, the Sumarin family. But it's, in the end of the day, it maybe not tomorrow, but especially if all our court efforts fails, it's going to come down to you. We need you. The family needs you. The family needs you. We are talking about people. And let's never forget that.
Exactly. Exactly. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, one and all, to each of our speakers. They've spoken so powerfully tonight. Thank you. Again, this is recorded. Go back, listen to it again once it is on the websites of the organizations sponsoring this. I do want to thank MP Richard Bergen, who joined us for a while. We'll get the recording to him so he can hear it in full, and hopefully this will go to other parliamentarians. We know a number of their researchers have been with us for the webinar. I want to thank all of you and the wider audience as well. Having gained more understanding of the reality on the ground in Palestine, Israel, we do call for more MPs to sign Early Day Motion 529 and to press for the end of the charitable status of JNF UK. These are meaningful steps along the way of seeking justice for Palestinians. May the Sumarin family, along with other Palestinians, be saved from forced eviction from their homes and the human suffering that this generates. None of this will proceed without the Israeli government's explicit authorization. The state of Israel must be held responsible for the policy and the practice of ethnic cleansing. So too must its agents like the JNF. We must not give up seeking observation of the rule of law here in the UK as well as internationally. Despite everything that is happening in the world today, let us remain optimistic. Help us achieve our goal of a just and sustainable peace for all people groups everywhere, based on international law. Thank you and good night.